Okay, well, we're right on 7:30, so let's get started. So welcome everybody to Transplant Talk Live. So this is like a live version of our monthly newsletter where we get to talk a little bit more openly and a little bit more interactively on the topics that we cover in that newsletter. And I'd also like to thank Tour de Cure for making this series of webinars possible. My name is Jen, and I'm coming to you from Daramuragal up on the north of Sydney. I am the Marketing and Communications Manager for Arrow, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Arrow at the end of our webinar. So tonight we have a panel for you. And while everybody on our panels, all of the guests that we've had so far are experts in their own stories, their own experiences, some are expert health professionals, we can't talk to you about anything that's specific to your situation. So if questions come up for you tonight that you really need to delve into a bit more for your own treatment, we encourage you to approach your care team as the first port of call. So we can talk about general information, general experiences by all means, and we welcome your questions tonight. On that, we will be monitoring the Q&A panel. So down the bottom of your screen, probably, you'll be able to access that. So if you've got questions for any of the people who are presenting tonight, please put them in that Q&A tab. The webinar chat is also open for you to interact with one another there. So without further ado, let's move on to our guests tonight. So we have three people kindly giving up their Tuesday evening to share with us tonight. We have Chris Taylor, who is joining us from Castlemaine, Jajawarang country. I hope I've said that right, Chris. And Sam Sheehan, who is in Brisbane, and he's on the lands of the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, I believe. Nikhil Autar, who is joining us from the Liverpool area in Sydney on the lands of the Darug people. And we're being led in conversation tonight by Yvonne Panek-Hudson, who is in Naarm, Melbourne. Yvonne is a consultant, a nurse consultant. Have I got that right, Yvonne? At the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre and the Royal Melbourne Hospital. She's also co-creator and co-host of the Straight and Marrow podcast. If you haven't heard the Straight and Marrow, I encourage you to look that up on Spotify or any other platform where you might get your podcasts. The Straight and Marrow, it's brilliant. Check it out. So she's no stranger to leading conversations and presenting in forums like this. And with that, Yvonne, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks to Arrow. I was thinking today, time flies when you're having fun. Webinar number 4. Who would have thought at the beginning of this wonderful journey that we'd be here now on our final webinar for this series, and what a webinar we've got for you tonight. You know, when we're thinking about podcast episodes and webinar episodes, and we're asking people for their feedback and for their recommendations, the strongest recommendation is that people ask for, the biggest request is to hear from people who have actually been through transplants. And so, you know, tonight is about us having an honest conversation about having a bone marrow transplant. And so I'd like to introduce our 3 guest speakers tonight. And I'm going to begin by introducing Nikhil Autar, who is, as you would have seen on the Arrow information, the New South Wales Young Australian of the Year for 2024. So congratulations, Nikhil. Nikhil's an ex-cancer patient and has had 2 bone marrow transplants. He's a newly graduated medical doctor, on top of all of that, a medical researcher, a poker pro, a writer, a speaker, co-founder of Doctors Against Violence, founder of several social enterprises, including Beam Health, making affordable healthcare products for our most vulnerable populations, and Nia Maps, the Google Maps of accessibility, and they are awesome, so check those out. Our next guest tonight is Sam Sheehan. Sam was living and working in Vietnam when he was diagnosed with aplastic anemia. Sam left his home in Vietnam to go to work one day and never returned to his apartment or office. Instead, he found himself on the wild ride of diagnosis, hospital admissions, Medivac return to Australia, chemotherapy, and an allogeneic bone marrow transplant. Sam is now 6 months post-transplant. He'll talk to you about that tonight, and is recovering well. Sam's currently increasing his capacity at work, and he looks forward to getting back to a normal life back in Australia.
Thank you.
And last but definitely not least, Christine Taylor, and full declaration, we've known each other for 16 years, Chris. Yep, at least. So in early 2006, Chris Taylor was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Chris was initially referred to a local hematologist and began a grueling regimen of 9 rounds of chemotherapy, and was eventually informed that she was in remission, but that an allogeneic bone marrow transplant was necessary for her long-term health. So Chris underwent the transplant in 2008. Today, Chris continues to run a successful consulting and coaching business with her husband, Peter. She has 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren and resides in regional Victoria. This year marks 16 years since Chris's transplant, and she remains healthy, active, and enjoying life. And we're really looking forward to hearing about all of those stories. So thank you very much and welcome. We've had a little bit of an opportunity to get to know one another before the webinar began, so that was really, really special. So hopefully we can make this more of a conversation. But you know, we want to be crowd pleasers, and we know that our guests tonight want to hear all about you. And so, Chris, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to ask you to start. I'm hoping what you can do is share with us a bit about yourself, your family, what life was like for you before you were diagnosed with CLL, about your transplant, and what things were like for you going in for your transplant and just immediately after.
Sure. So yes, it was certainly I was leading a busy professional life. I was a consultant coach at that time, and I developed a very strange lump on the back of my neck, and it took about 6 weeks for that to be diagnosed, and eventually after some blood tests, got the diagnosis of CLL, which was a bit of a shock, although when I started reading about the potentials, which I was doing at that time, it sort of made sense. But I wasn't unwell. I didn't feel unwell. I just had this strange lump on my neck. So I was then referred to a local hematologist, and had a scan and started on chemotherapy. Got my blood counts back to normal. So my white cell count was very high. So that went back to normal, but the actual gland development throughout my body didn't resolve. So he kept me on chemo, and I eventually had 9 rounds of that chemo, which was enormous. And as a patient, you don't know that. You don't know what's meant to be normal or what's not. So at 9 rounds, I decided that I would not stay with this man, and as the hematologist. And a very good friend of mine said, look, I think you really need to go and see John Seymour, Dr. John Seymour at Peter Mac, and have a second opinion, which I did. And it was like the most amazing experience. I mean, John is an incredible doctor. He came out to greet me. It was none of this old-fashioned medicine aspect, which that previous hematologist told me that when I stopped going to see him, I would die because he was keeping me alive, and that was I going to go and meditate and live on herbs for the rest of my life. So first thing I would always say is seek a second opinion and go to a major hospital. I mean, the treatment is just so profoundly different. John Seymour did a whole lot of tests. He said I was in remission and to take some time off because my body really was not in a great state after 9 rounds of chemo. So I did that and I travelled overseas. And in this meantime, I was doing a lot of things. I did a lot of research. I looked at integrative medicine. I took up Buddhism. I did meditation. I changed my diet. I did a whole lot of things. And one of the things that I remember asking David Ritchie, who was then became my haematologist for the transplant, was because I was really interested in what success looks like with a transplant, is what does success look like and what do you have to be in that state to achieve that? And he said, be as physically and emotionally well as you can be. So that was my aim. And I was not comfortable about having a transplant, of course. It was very challenging. But I was very lucky, very fortunate. My sister was a compatible donor. So then I went and had the week of chemo that gets all your blood counts down to nothing. I was at the Royal Melbourne and then I had the transplant. And look, I did really well for 3 weeks. I was really thinking that I was going to get out pretty fast. And then I had some complications. So my complications at that point were, I ended up in ICU 3 times twice with heart issues. Then I ended up with CCU, coronary care, with heart issues. And then I had a breathing incident. I had renal failure. So I had dialysis. And I do remember meeting, when I met Yvonne very early on, one of the things that she told me, which I couldn't quite understand why, was that she told me that that the ICU and CCU were very close to the bone marrow transplant unit. And I said to her, well, why would I need those? And of course, then I discovered that I did need those, and the lift trip down, and that lift was not too far. So it took me 6 weeks. I was in hospital for 6 weeks. That to me was agonising. I hated being in hospital, and every day was like countdown. And getting out was just fantastic. Like, it was the most relieving thing. I went back in once, I think, to be overnight. But then, of course, you start, which probably, Sam, you'll probably talk about too, is that you're just going back and forth into hospital to have your appointments, and it's pretty relentless. And the medications that you line up on your kitchen bench to take each day, enormous amounts of them. But gradually, and the fatigue, I'd have to say the fatigue was phenomenal. I've never experienced fatigue before. And you can't make the bed. I couldn't make the bed. I couldn't walk to the gate. But gradually, I started to improve in that time. So gradually got better. And I think at about 9 months post-transplant, I was starting to work again. So I was back at work, feeling pretty good, and able to concentrate for periods of time, because that was the other thing I found. I just couldn't concentrate. I was too tired, too unwell, really, in many ways, to concentrate, to go back to work. But that's those pieces of independence, like getting in your car and driving for the first time, going for a walk past the letterbox, were all really good steps to take. Does that sort of answer your question, Yvonne?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Chris, I think it's a really, you've brought up some really very valuable and really important points that many people talk about early post-transplant. So it's probably a really perfect opportunity to ask Sam to tell us his story and share it with the group, given that he's he's kind of the baby of the group, aren't you, Sam?
I guess you could call me the baby of the group. Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, Sam, tell us a little bit about your story. So, who's in your support group, a
Sure.
bit about, your life in Vietnam and then your diagnosis, coming back to Australia, your transplant, and a bit about how things are for you now.
Yeah, definitely. So as mentioned, I was living over in Vietnam with my partner. We were setting up a new office for our business out of Vietnam. We'd just been traveling Europe for probably 6 weeks, had been back in the office for maybe a week, and then we were going to my partner's dad's wedding in Thailand. So we went to Thailand. I got a massage as part of the hotel we were staying at, and I bruised a bit on my body and sort of disregarded that, didn't think anything of it. I'd been having troubles with my wisdom teeth in the lead up to this, so I was actually scheduled to get them taken out when we got back to Vietnam. So I went in on the Wednesday to get my teeth cleaned and checked and x-rayed before getting them removed on Saturday. And my mouth was bleeding quite a lot when they were doing the clean. So the dentist had said, "Oh, do you normally bleed a lot, or do you have any blood conditions?" And I said, "No, not at all." 3 months earlier, I'd just done all the health checks and had blood tests and scans and everything to get my residence card in Vietnam. So I knew that there was nothing that was sort of lingering in my system. So that afternoon, I got a blood test done, and the next morning at about 10 a.m., I think it was, I got a text message from the dentist saying, "You, in somewhat broken English, you need to go to a hospital immediately." And I sort of thought, all right, like Vietnamese dentist, maybe send me the results and I'll forward those to a doctor in Australia if it's seeming something that's serious. So I got the results, and it gives you the column of what you are and the column of what your blood counts and other things should be. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, this is a bit concerning. But then I thought, oh, we're in a developing country. Maybe the instruments that are being used are older, or surely there's got to be some sort of, surely something's gone wrong along the line. So I then forwarded that to my partner's parents' good friends. And then he was on the phone to me within 5 minutes and sort of said, "Get out a pen and paper and write down exactly what I'm about to tell you. You're in a lot of trouble. Your counts are all very close to zero, if not at zero. You need to get to a hospital, and we need to be in contact with them and work out how to get you back as quickly as possible." So was in ICU for 7 days in Vietnam, which that would probably be an hour discussion on its own, the roller coaster of the Vietnamese health system, which in the end worked out to be a lifesaver, keeping me, getting me good enough to fly after 7 days, and then having a nursing team fly from Australia to Vietnam and then fly back with me, where I went straight into hospital at the Marrow in Brisbane for a few weeks. And during that time, they confirmed the diagnosis of aplastic anemia, which had sort of been toyed with already. It was just sort of confirming what was already known in a lot of ways. I had never heard of aplastic anemia personally. I thought it maybe was something about being anemic and low in iron, so I didn't think really much of it at all. I thought this was a quick, easy fix with, nothing to be concerned about. That changed pretty quickly. I was out of hospital for a couple of weeks while they tested my family members to see if I had a match to be a donor for a bone marrow transplant, which for aplastic anemia is the only way to be cured of it. Luckily, my brother James, thank you, Jim, if you're online, he came back as a perfect match. So given the severity of my aplastic anemia, all of this happened, and I was in hospital starting chemo about 5 weeks later. So was very fortunate in the way that it was moved along and how quickly we got sort of to that end process of beginning the chemo and starting the bone marrow transplant process.
So I stop you there for just a second, because this
Sure.
is really interesting, I think, for our listeners. So most people who have bone marrow transplants, as you know, have a diagnosis of cancer, and so they have experience with having treatment prior to their bone marrow transplant. So for someone like you, you went from a diagnosis that was confusing in and of itself, and, within 5 or 6 weeks, you were having a bone marrow transplant. What was going on for you at that time and for your family? And, on top of that, you were in another country. So what were you thinking at the time, if you can remember?
Yeah, I think it was probably a lot more stressful for my family and my partner than it was so for me. The fact that everything happened so quickly probably helped with my spirits and gave me a bit of naivety in the whole thing. Like, I didn't really have time to sink in how bad things were, because it was like, we've gone from being sick in Vietnam to getting back to Australia to confirming what the diagnosis is, to then your treatment will start in 4 weeks, or sorry, in between that, waiting for results of my siblings to see whether there's a match or not. And there's points in that period where you are really helpless. Like, it doesn't matter how much green juices you drink or how much you stay out of the sun or anything like that. It really doesn't matter. It's just a lot of dead time, which does make you think a lot. And then you get to worst case scenarios and you think a lot around that. But I was sort of having aplastic anemia, was a bit different, like you were saying, because it's not a cancer. So then trying to work out lots of different things, like what's actually going on. Like, I've heard about leukemia, which, from my understanding, there's similarities with the treatment that I received to people that do have that. But a lot of it was, I guess, unknown for me, and being quite a rare condition as well. There wasn't a lot of sort of people I could call up and talk to that had gone through it.
And, you've got a celebratory event tomorrow, your 6-month anniversary post-transplant. So tell us a bit about, Chris mentioned returning to work at around 9 months, and she talked about fatigue. How are things for you at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment, things are quite good. I spent nearly 3 months in hospital, so I got quite sick as well after getting the transplant. And unfortunately, there's no sugarcoating that situation. I was in ICU a number of times, and my parents and partner had the unfortunate discussion of, this is the end of the road for him. He's really sick. He's not responding. So fortunately and selfishly for me, I actually don't remember any of my time in ICU. I was living the life on very strong drugs, I can imagine. So for me, that period wasn't as stressful as what I imagine it would be for all the people around me. So I had quite a long stint in hospital, which in itself probably had other health effects on me, like mental health side of things, not being allowed out of the room or out of the ward, and slowly increasing that to then being able to get home visits. So towards the end of my 3 months, I was allowed to go home for 4 or 5 hours during the day and then come back at night, get more treatment, and then stay overnight in at the hospital. So I sort of built up to things, and it was very, very slow going at the beginning. But the last 3 months probably 2 months have been really good. Like, I'm probably 80% back to work, which, has been quite good given I'm only sort of 6 months out. But I say I'm only 6 months out, but it feels like it's been an eternity to get to this point. So although it's 6 months, it feels like it could have been years.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And speaking of years, we might now ask Nikhil to step in and tell us about his story. Nikhil, you have such an interesting, rich story, both your cancer and your BMT story, but also all of the contributions that you've made since then. But I suspect that you were doing some of those things even before you got sick, right? This is part of your DNA. So tell us a bit about you, your family, and your transplant story.
Yeah, no, sure. So me, I was diagnosed when I was 17. So I was still in high school in my HSC year, actually, which is year 12. kind of thing, for those not in Sydney, New South Wales. And yeah, I mean, like you guys, I had that story of not expecting it, and maybe even more so, but it's just as much like we don't expect something like this to happen. And me, especially when I was 17, I really didn't. So I started, feeling really, really tired at a point where I was studying. I really wanted to be a doctor when I was doing my HSC. And yeah, suddenly I was not feeling motivated to do that anymore after working like, months in advance before exams, which is odd for me. And then I think the thing that sort of sent me in to finally get a blood test to find out what was the issue was an infection which didn't budge for days. And similarly, I got told by my GP that, Nikhil, you need to go to ED straight away. And even at 17, I knew that that wasn't a good thing, right? And I can always remember, like, on the notes in ED, someone had written acute bone marrow failure. And I'd read a book called A Thousand Paper Cranes about a Japanese girl who got cancer soon after the atomic bombs. And I asked Dad, hey, Dad, is that leukemia? And yeah, Dad was looking straight at me and he was like, no. And then I got the news, right? And the way my doctor put it to me was, Nikhil, the good news is you're 17 and you have leukemia, but the bad news is you're 17 and you have leukemia. And yeah, that's an odd way to put it, right? But I think eventually, like, that gave me something to latch onto because, yeah, for me, everyone was telling me, be positive, you're strong, and all that kind of thing after I got told this news, but you can't after something massive like that, right? But what actually got me out, rather than all that positivity and stuff, was me taking a step back, looking at what had happened to me, pretending it happened to someone else. And then from there, I could see things a bit more logical. And when I asked what would I tell someone else to do in that position, for the first time, the emotions dropped away. And I was like, look, I can't change that now. So it doesn't make sense to keep worrying about it. Now, you're human. You can't help but be afraid of things. But in the end, like, that was the sort of process that got me to start questioning my doubts and fears. So yeah, I was going to be starting chemo soon, which would suck. But wasn't chemo also a medicine? The thing that can get me out of this, right? Yeah, I was given these slim chances, 10 to 20% in my case with AML, but wasn't that still a chance? And yeah, I was 17 when I got diagnosed, which sucked, but wasn't that a good thing because I could get the hardest treatments possible? I had a family behind me rather than having to care for people and have all these financial stresses on me. And yeah, I guess that sort of allowed me to see a second way of looking at things, and didn't happen overnight. And yeah, it didn't happen all the time, but it gave me, I think that process allowed me to find something to catch onto, I guess, to latch onto when I was feeling down. And yeah, so then at the same time, bone marrow transplants are tough, and I did find it very tough in my case. So I ended up having, I think someone in the chat mentioned there on their second bone marrow transplant. I needed a second because I relapsed after my first, which is a very harrowing time because I was told maybe palliative care might be the best option. But yeah, eventually we managed to get through on that. And yeah, somehow I managed to get into med school in between those two transplants. I got an estimate, which was very helpful. I always tell my brother, I didn't even sit the HSC and I beat you, right? So that's, you have to take something out of it, right? But yeah, in those stressful times, again, that mindset sort of helped me a lot. But the thing I wish I'd been told earlier was just how much of a long slog it can be. So I think, like Chris, I had so much fatigue, but with my chronic graft-versus-host, this won't happen to all of you. I've probably got one of the more severe cases, but I've ended up having so many things happen. So diabetes and avascular necrosis from long-term steroids. And that means I need a wheelchair to get around longer distances now. And diabetes, you're going to stab yourself, which isn't fun. Medications, that's a stress as always. I highly recommend, I put it off for so long, but a Webster pack really helped me out, right? And I used to think, oh, it's for old people, but like it saves me like 10 minutes a day. So I was like, that was a big thing for me. And then other things I've had random things like open heart surgery at 26. I had my left eye blowout as well, from a central retinal venous occlusion. And I've recently got myasthenia gravis in my voice. You might hear a bit of a twang, and that makes me even more fatigued. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, these things suck, and I do get down about it. Don't get me wrong. I get depressed, I get angry, frustrated a lot of the time, but whenever I'm not in that down phase, I think I'm prepared by seeing people who can help me out, right? Professionals. By also, when I was happy, reminding myself of what did get me out of those troubles and strifes. And I fish once a week. I do some crazy things. I go out 30 Ks to sea and catch tuna despite all of this. 30 kilo tuna. I just want to brag about that. But yeah, those things keep me they keep me living, right? And they really help me out. And yeah, I guess in the meantime as well, I'd had med school go on for 12 years because of all my medical problems. But in that time, I did some research. Managed to start up some companies, helped a few doctors expand their group, and created Doctors Against Violence. And yeah, I mean, these things, they are tiring for sure, but they give me purpose too. And yeah, they're things that I have a team to help me out with. They're not killing me too much, health-wise, fatigue-wise. And yeah, I love doing them whenever I can. So yeah, that's me.
That's awesome, Nikhil. Thank you. And we might give you a little rest for a minute or
Yeah.
two. And we will circle back to you in a few minutes. But and we really encourage the wonderful 31 participants who are on this webinar to post your questions for our guest speakers tonight, and we will open up the Q&A in about 10 minutes or so. But we've come to a time point post-transplant. We spoke to Sam. Sam's about to celebrate 6 months post-transplant. Chris, you got to kind of the 9-month mark. Talk to us, Chris, a bit more about life after BMT. So, getting back to work gradually. Also, how things were for your family as well after transplant. It's really intense for family members in that early period after transplant, providing lots of support. So, how do family members cope in the longer term after transplant as well? And how you overcame fatigue, getting back to a new routine. It would be great if you could share some of that post-transplant experience with us as well, please.
I think if I go to the beginning, the sort of the fatigue part, a bit like what Nikhil was talking about, is with fatigue, you can't really do much except rest. I mean, there's really no other solution. You have to listen to your body. And I think I had to learn that. It was a bit of a lesson for me. I don't think I'd ever really listened to my body, particularly. I was a bit of a go-getter, hardworking, very active, achievement-orientated person. And one of the things that I've learnt to do is to tune in a lot more into the messages that your body does give you. And fatigue, there's no choice. You have no choice. Like, there is no choice about what you do. You can't get up when you can't get up, or you can't walk when you can't walk somewhere. So you have to listen. And that was a sort of gradual process. And for me, that was quite challenging. But every little step, again, a little bit like what Nikhil was talking about, is every little step seems to make that difference, because you think, oh, okay, I've got a little bit more here than what I thought. And getting back into life was, I'm a consultant, so I ran a session for an executive group, and I came out of it, and then later I went, I have no idea what I did in that session. I don't think I was really there. I was doing something, and they thought it was okay, so that was good. But I think that's where fatigue gets you, is you're not really tuned in, or you're not focused, and you don't have that energy to keep you going as you do normally. I think it was just time, really, for me. Time, resting, good food, all those things started to make a difference. I think what you were saying, Yvonne, I was thinking about it today, is the support around you by your family and understanding how different family members deal with it. So I have 2 daughters there. They're in there. Simone, my youngest, had just finished year 12, and my older daughter, Katie, was sort of just early uni time, and they both reacted in such different ways. Katie the oldest one, was highly anxious a lot of the time, really attentive. She built me a vision board 2 vision boards for my ward room. She decorated, she came in all the time. She was on the bed a lot of the time, chatting. She'd go off and do whatever she had to do and come back. When Peter, my husband, would get home after he visited me, she would be like, what's going on, what's happening? So detail was really important, but anxiety was high. My other daughter had a new relationship, a new boyfriend, so I didn't see her very much. And, she would ring me or I'd chat to her, but it was such a different reaction. And I think for her, she couldn't quite face it. So that was okay too. So I just went, that's fine. You do what you need to do. Later on, she said, I feel really guilty. And I said, no, it's actually the way you have to manage this. It's your way of dealing with it. So we did have conversations, but probably at different points. My husband was like, I was very demanding. I think someone had told me don't eat the food at the hospital. So Peter brought breakfast in every morning, and he brought me dinner every night. Now, that's a huge ask, and he was working. And I would be at the window waiting to see him. And if he was a bit late, I'd probably go, where are you? And he did it. And I had friends who were bringing food. I had visitors. We had set up an email piece where people would come. I would have 2 visitors at different times every day that could come at that time. So it was like a schedule. And then if I was too unwell, an email would go out to people and they wouldn't come. There were certain people that came in and spent time on the bed, like sort of, it felt like a bedroom rather than a hospital room. And that was really helpful for me. I think when I look back on it now, a bit like I think what Sam and Nikhil were saying, is that other people find this really hard. They are seeing you look really different, unwell, falling asleep mid-conversation. I used to do that a lot. And so it's quite challenging for them. And I think for my husband, it was extraordinarily challenging. He saw me in some really dire situations where he thought he was going to lose me. And, he'd suffered PTSD as a result. So it's sort of, connected to other parts of his life. But I think when you're going through it, it's a totally different experience to observing someone you love, you're close to, what they see, because it's very different. You don't want to be in it. I didn't want to be in it and going through that, but it's a very different experience to what your partners are going through. So they need support as well. That's the other thing I would say is that the people around you that you're closest to really need support, because it's a very challenging process to see someone go through really difficult times.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, that's a really good point around support for partners and for carers, and it is still quite a neglected area that we haven't quite got right yet in the world of transplants, but would like to very much, because, you know, as you know, for all of you know, for carers, for partners, as you say, Chris, they're on all the time, aren't they? And the focus is on the recovery of the recipient. And then it's often what we see is after the transplant recipient is physically a lot better, that the carer, the partners actually really start to consider what the experience is like, has been like for them.
Yeah.
Sam, so obviously at 6 months post-transplant now, who are your main support people, and how are they going, and how are you, you know, what sort of support are they getting along the way?
Yep. So I was very fortunate to have a partner with me the entire way, Hannah. So from all the way at the first conversation and first text message in Vietnam, probably from my complaining as well, as I started to deteriorate and feel sick without actually knowing what was going on, to have her there, and then my parents and siblings, my family, my partner's family, and all my friends that, like, I've had a lot of them since school, sort of thing. I had a great support network to rely on and speak to, which initially I didn't really want to tell too many people, mostly because I didn't know what was going on. So I didn't really have too much of a story to tell. And it's hard because as I started to learn more about what the disease or condition, whatever you want to call it, was, there's the sense of knowing the helplessness that would come from your family or your carers or anyone that's close to you, because they want to help, they want to do what they can, but there's very little, well, I mean, outside of course, the emotional support and being there for you, there's not much that can be done about the actual condition, unless, of course, you're a match for a transplant or anything like that. But when it comes to, like, I remember having the discussion with mum and seeing her very upset. Maybe I just started the chemo and was starting to get really sick, and it was starting to show. I wasn't as chipper as I normally am. And you could just see the fact that she was very helpless in that situation. I don't have any children, but I can imagine seeing your child, even though I was 30, still a mama's boy. Even though there was that situation, that the look of helplessness there, that also, like, even though I know it's not my fault, you feel bad that then all these people are becoming involved in your battle, I guess, and the impact that it will have likely for the rest of lives, sort of thing. Like, I can't speak for the people directly around me and how they're traveling with it all now, but I can only imagine during those times where I don't remember anything, where it was really bad, that image or those times and those discussions around that would be quite lasting. In saying that, those people then ride the wave of, for me, I would say, success. Like, we're making great leaps and bounds in getting back to work, doing more social activities and those things. So then they're the ones that have seen you at a really bad point in my case, but then now are seeing the progress and how things are getting better. And I always sort of say, like, if I'm not worried about it, you guys can't really be worried about it. It's not fair if you're worrying and I'm not. So it's sort of, yeah, it's one of those things. It's hard for me to answer on their behalf, but yeah, I think there'll be images and discussions that will stick with them for a very long time, unfortunately, when things are bad. But at the same time, like, things do get better, and if you can keep some humor going through the whole process and some good spirits, like, that really does go a long way if you're spending prolonged times in hospital and, yeah, around the same people, the same nurses. It's good to try and do the best you can, keep your spirits up.
Thanks, Sam. Nikhil, did you want to share some of your experience post-transplant? What things were helpful for you? Also, you know, who are your main support people? How they've coped, how you've helped to support one another?
Yeah, no, sure. I was lucky as a kid, right? The good news is I was 17, I had leukemia. I had mom, dad, and my brother there with me. So, I mean, at the start, my brother was useless. He wasn't a match, but we eventually got another donor. But since then, I mean, he's literally been there for me. He's 2 years younger than me. During his HSC year, he was driving mum and dad around, making sure that the princess that I was in hospital, got anything that I needed. I remember my mum, she and dad, I was like, I want French toast. And they brought me French toast. And I was like, no, it's too soggy. So then what they did is they brought like a frying pan to the car park, made the French toast, got it up to my room in like a minute or two. My dad, you know, the nurses and doctors, the nurses were saying that we can't have your TV and your PS3 up here because the electrical codes or something like that were going to be broken. So my dad, after hours, just walked in, TV, 40-inch TV under his arms, brought in a PS3 as well, put it there, and then the doctor's like, "Oh, nice TV," and I managed to keep it for my whole my whole journey. So like those kind of things were amazing, but it's like the constant, the everyday things, right? So when I needed physical support, like you, Chris, I managed to get food whenever I wanted, whenever I wanted. Um, for the last few years of medical school, I started having issues moving and like mobility wise, and they'd drive me to med school and back in Campbelltown. Even to this day, when I'm not feeling the best, mum, I mean, she works a few minutes from my hospital, but I still get to passenger princess my way to work because, yeah, I get tired. So, like, all of that, I've been very fortunate to have that. But yeah, I think other things, you know, when you're younger, you get isolated very easily, and in me, it was at like a formative time of your life when you're supposed to be, you know, going out exploring the world and understanding things and building memories with your uni mates. So yeah, for a while I was, you know, I was put off. I was kind of sad at times because I couldn't do all those things, but at the same time, the friends that were there for me, they are my closest friends to this day, right? And yeah, those guys really help. And I think I remember reading something early on. I mean, you can when you get cancer, you can close yourself off and, you know, be private about it. But in my case, what they suggested was to build an army, right? So in the end, luckily, Facebook was sort of coming up then. So, you know, I posted about it. I told my high school mates, "Oh, I'm not coming to school." They're like, "Why?" And I was like, "Oh, I got leukemia, lol." And yeah, after that, I started getting messages, memes, you know, whenever I needed them. And I think the last thing as well is I started writing about my experiences, right? And speaking for charities and good causes as well when required. And I think it was mutually beneficial because then for me, like I could share the things that got me through my journey. And then not only would I get joy when people would comment back or email me or tell me, you know, if this has really been really helpful for them, you know, how they got through depression, how they got through social anxiety after the way your body changes and looks after cancer, like all these kind of things that helped me feeling glad that I'm helping some people. But it also helped me as I was writing it out, like I'd be, you know, reaffirming to myself how I could get out of the position I'm in and how I could help myself, right? And yeah, I think those things really helped. And I was also fortunate enough to have uh, the medical degree behind me as well. So yeah, that helped me. And I have family who are doctors too. So I think I was fortunate more than most in being able to get a last minute script and all those kinds of things. But like, I think if you've got good doctors, as Chris said, seek second opinions if you're not happy with your care. I had to switch off the doctor because she said, Nikhil, so I was getting cramps, and I know a bunch of people do get cramps post-transplant. It's not written much about, but it's something that can ruin lives. And I think as many as 35% of people do feel that way. So the doctor told me, Nikhil, you've got these now, but it's a very non-specific thing. Research will never be done on it, and you'll have this condition forever. And that was without referring me to rheumatologist, psychiatrist, anyone who could make differences. So I switched to another doctor who really, was there for me as a whole person, right? And he was making sure I was getting all the, things to keep my gut healthy and keep my mind healthy as well. So he referred me to psychiatrists when I needed them. And yeah, actually through that, I worked with him and managed to get a drug for myself, which could help my cramps. And literally after day 2 of taking this combination therapy, I was crampless. And I'm actually publishing that in a research journal too. So like, yeah, there are many different places you can go to for help, and I encourage you to try and get all of them. I'd say if you want to have a read on my blog, you can. Right now, the website is down for maintenance, but in time, just look up my name and you can find that. Reach out if you want. And yeah, I think someone had a question for me as well.
Yeah, there are some questions. So and look, we will definitely share the information about your blog. And so there's a great reference and resource page on the Arrow website. So please tap into that. We've got a few questions which I'm going to open up. Nikhil, I might just give you a little rest, and I'm going to send out. I'm going to start with a general question, and it actually segues nicely from what you were just talking about. I really love that you mentioned and have discussed finding someone that looked after you as a whole person. That is incredibly important. So there's a question from Madeline here. Thank you, Madeline. And I think you might be a healthcare professional just based on the question. It is, what would you say were the most helpful things that the acute hospital team did to support you? Is there anything you would suggest for future improvements for patients who are admitted? Anything big or small? I appreciate all of your insights. Thanks for the question, Madeline. Sam, do you want to start by just a couple of things that would be helpful suggestions, and then I'll go to Chris.
Sure. Humour's a big thing for me about how I got through sort of all of it in reasonable sort of state. And the nursing team were really great with that. Like, they would come in, they would be like supportive generally, but not just talking about the condition. It's, how are you going? Like, what's been happening? What do you enjoy? So I love my racehorses and those sorts of things. So they would come in and we would do not a competition, but they would like draw their best version of a horse on a whiteboard. And so that was just a bit of humor and something that would help take your mind off what you were going through. And like, that's probably quite a small sort of, you could say it's a small impact sort of play, but that was something that for those 5 minutes while you're watching someone to struggle to draw a horse, sort of takes your mind off things. Definitely. I mean, I want to say hospital meals, but that's probably a bigger fish to fry, if I can say that. I did see recently in Queensland they're changing they're changing it to more of a room service style arrangement, which I know some hospitals in Queensland do, but now the Royal, which is where the transplants are done, are changing to. So that would be a good one, because we were getting dinners at about 4:30 in the afternoon. So come 8 o'clock, I wasn't sure what to do.
Yeah. And Chris, any tips from you for hospital teams?
Oh, look, I think there's I love that about the food. I think really for me it's the personal relationship, I think, with your acute team that's so important. Like how they get to know you, because you're there for a long time. So they really have to get to know you. So if you have a sense of humour, or if you have family, or it's that personal piece. And I remember I had a doctor in the ICU, and I had only met her, really briefly, but there was something about the way she paid me attention, noticed something. I used to wear a scarf on my head because I had no hair, of course. And she said, "Oh, I love that scarf." And then we had an easy chat. And it does take your mind off the circumstance that you've found yourself in, like you can't breathe, or your heart's going racing at 10 miles an hour. I think that for me, I also had a woman come in who was a counsellor. I refused to see her twice, but she persevered, and I'm really glad she did, because the third time she came in, I actually chatted to her. But I didn't want to talk to some people about certain things. And there's some, I found initially, a bit like what Nikhil was saying, you can be a bit embarrassed, or Sam, you might have been saying, a bit embarrassed about your condition. So there's something, it sometimes takes you a bit of time to then open up. So I think people who can really notice when it might be a good time to chat to you a little bit more deeply about how you're feeling, that can be really helpful too.
Thanks, Chris. And look, whilst you're talking about, feeling ready and reaching out to people to have a conversation about how you're feeling and connecting with that, just that right person, because chemistry is really important as well. There's a question from Mark in the chat, and he said, "I'm thinking about talking to someone about my mental health, as sometimes I get really down. Is this something that you would recommend?"
I think if you're thinking about it, I would say, yeah. I think there's nothing, like I'm a coach as well, so I know what happens is that people reflect in those conversations with someone who's trusted and who can connect with them. And I think that's invaluable. You really need that, because you really need people to be able to hear and listen to what your mental health is and how you're feeling, because it's not an easy journey without doing that. That would be my piece on that.
Yeah, towards the end of my stay, I said to them, I was like, the aplastic anemia has become the least of my issues at the moment. Like, if you don't let me out of this hospital, like, I'm just going to go myself. And that's when I started getting the day passes, because I was really struggling with the mental health side of things, being in there constantly, having really bad fatigue, but then just feeling like I couldn't do anything. So in my instance, I would come home for the day. I would just have a shower in my own shower, because hospital showers suck. So maybe that's another thing that could be changed. I think to Madeline's question, change the bathrooms. But I would do that, and I would do the same thing. I would just lay on the couch and watch TV. I wouldn't be doing anything different than what I was in hospital, but it was just the ability to get out, have a change of environment, see more than 2 people at a time if there were people at the house, and then I'd go back to hospital that night. But by breaking the cycle that I was in for 2.5 or 3 months, that sort of went a long way for me. So I'd say definitely worthwhile talking to someone if you've got the access to, which I mean we all should get access to, having gone through it. Absolutely.
Thanks, Sam. There was a question in the chat, which Nikhil, you have very, very kindly provided a written answer to. So thank you very much. It was a question around, Nikhil mentioned that he has AVN, which is avascular necrosis, and that he sometimes needs to use a wheelchair for his mobility. And Courtney asked a question about that, and Nikhil has really kindly shared his story. That he'd been on prednisolone for quite a while, and that the wheelchair is really helpful in helping to maintain your mobility, Nikhil. But I think another really valuable piece of information in your reply is about seeking access to the NDIS. And that's a conversation I think that anyone who is requiring additional support should talk to their healthcare team, their specialist nurse, their haematologist, their social worker about whether they are eligible for NDIS. So that's something that I encourage you to have a conversation with your team about if you think it would be helpful to support you. It's 8:30, Jen. We could go on forever. We had an inkling that this was going to be great, but it's spectacular. So I'm going to hand back to you, Jen, to say goodbye and any final messages. And thanks to our panel.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. Thanks to Nikhil and Chris and Sam, and for being so generous with sharing your stories, the real stuff that happens before, during, and after transplant. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions that will come in after we wrap up. So if you've had a question that we haven't managed to answer tonight, or you didn't get a chance to type it into the chat, feel free to send it through. You can reach me. I'm jtaylor@arrow.org.au, or you can, if you forget that, you can get a chance to write that down, or you just have that brain fog that happens so much, go to our website and put your question in on, there's a contact form there, so you can get to us that way as well. I will go just a couple of minutes over. As well as thanking our panel, I want to again thank Tour de Cure for the funding that has made this series of 4 webinars possible. We've had really great turnout for each one, and incredibly positive feedback. So thank you very much for all of you for coming along, giving up your Tuesday nights to be here with us over the past 4 webinars. We would love your feedback on tonight's session. When you wrap up from this session, you will see a survey that comes up. It's only really short, won't take you too long. Please bear in mind that it's anonymous, so you can give us really honest feedback and we value that. But the other thing to keep in mind with it being anonymous is that if you have a question that you would like us to respond to, we won't know who you are. So don't leave your questions there. Comments and things, great. If you do leave a question there, make sure you just put your first name at least, so we've got a chance of finding you. But that said, best place for questions is either the contact form on our website or sending an email to me. Tiny little bit about Arrow. So we are Arrow, the Bone Marrow Transplant Foundation, and we support people having bone marrow transplants and those that care for them. And that's quite a broad definition for those that care for them. We look after families and friends, but we also support healthcare professionals and medical researchers through scholarship programs. You can find out more about us at our website, which is arrow.org.au. So it's www.arrow.org.au. Tonight's webinar will be sent out. The recording will be sent out, as I said earlier. And by all means, tell all of your friends and family about these webinars too. Thank you very much to everyone for coming along, and we're going to wrap it up there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Everyone, bye.
Thank you.